3 decades ago, Ukraine was the third largest nuclear power in the world. Because after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, the new independent Ukraine inherited about 5,000 nuclear weapons that Moscow had previously stationed on its soil. With this, it had more nuclear weapons than all subsequent nuclear powers such as France, Great Britain or China together. It was only overrun by Russia itself and the USA. But Ukraine decided to fully disarm itself and voluntarily hand over all explosives to Russia. But why did it give away its most powerful weapon to Russia? And why is the topic so relevant today? Let's take a look at all these questions in today's video. Have fun! Let's jump to the time before the collapse of the Soviet Union. As one of the largest republics of the USSR, Ukraine occupied a significant part of the Soviet nuclear arsenal. These weapons were not only a symbol of military power, but also a central component of the deterrence strategy against the West. For decades, the Soviet Union delivered an atomic combat armament with the USA. At its peak, the two states had together around 70,000 atomic bomb heads, which had a total explosive power of more than 800,000 Hiroshima bombs. In comparison, today both states have around 50,000 atomic bombs. The Soviet Union developed a wide range of atomic weapons, from tactical nuclear weapons to powerful intercontinental missiles, which were able to reach targets across the entire globe. And in order to have as much deterrence potential as possible, the weapons were strategically distributed across the entire territory of the USSR. And Ukraine played a special role in this. Because at that time it was not only one of the largest republics within the Union, but also one of the westernmost regions of the country, which is why the threat scene for Europe was built from here on. The atomic weapons stationed in Ukraine were therefore not only of decisive importance for the Soviet defense strategy, but also played a role in ensuring the Soviet influence in the region. And so various kinds of nuclear weapons were stationed in Ukraine, including intercontinental ballistic missiles, strategic bombings which could be armed with nuclear weapons, and a number of tactical atomic weapons. Strategic bombers that could be equipped with nuclear weapons, and a number of tactical nuclear weapons. The Soviet Union also invested a considerable amount in the construction and maintenance of military bases in Ukraine that were necessary for the maintenance and provision of these weapons. These facilities not only included launch equipment and warehouses for the nuclear weapons, but also complex support systems for their operation. So many Ukrainians worked in this sector, which also provided extensive know-how about nuclear bombs in Ukraine. But the political and social situation within the Soviet Union was to change drastically by the end of the 1980s. Gorbachev's reforms, including glasnost and perestroika, led to an easing of the centralized Soviet grip, which in many republics, including Ukraine, fueled national movements. In particular, the reactor disaster of Chernobyl in 1986, directly at the Ukrainian border, was a decisive moment that undermined the trust of many Ukrainians in the Soviet government. As a result, the desire for more self-determination and independence was further strengthened. And after other partial republics had already broken out of Moscow, an overwhelming majority in a referendum on independence was also in favor of Ukraine on December 1, 1991. And so Ukraine became its own state. But in addition to the newly gained freedom and self-determination, Ukraine inherited the third largest nuclear weapons arsenal in the world with its exit from the Soviet Union. But for Russia and the other nuclear powers, this was a big problem. Russia, of course, lost a significant part of its deterrence potential. And the USA, Great Britain and France mainly had concerns about the political and military stability in the newly independent states, including Ukraine. There was the fear that the maintenance of nuclear weapons in these countries could lead to regional tensions and an armament race. Another important concern was the concern that nuclear weapons or nuclear material could fall into the hands of non-state actors or terrorist groups. And so the international community pushed for Ukraine. This should be in line with the global aspirations for the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons and the reduction of nuclear risk after the Cold War. In Ukraine, an intensive debate on this topic unfolded. The main point of the leaders of a detachment was that the task of nuclear weapons and the adherence to international non-proliferation standards would help Ukraine to integrate better into the international community. Ukraine had to establish itself as a new state on the international stage first, and it wanted to be a peaceful state in the first place. This should not only be economic advantages, but also political support and a stronger integration at European levels. And a large part of the population also seemed to support this path. Russia also seemed to be in no immediate danger at the time. The decision of Ukraine to give up its nuclear weapons was therefore not only a question of security policy, but also an act of geopolitical repositioning. Through the task of its nuclear arsenal, Ukraine signaled its desire to become part of a new, nuclear-free world order. And their relationship with Ukraine was also a challenge. Ukraine's relations with other nations, especially with the Western powers, should therefore be redefined. On the other hand, the maintenance of such a massive nuclear arsenal would have been extremely expensive. And this in a time when the Ukrainian state budget was virtually empty. But at that time, there were already numerous critical voices in wise preconditions. In 1993, the international relations theorist and professor at the University of Chicago, John Mearsheimer, said that a Ukraine without nuclear deterrence would probably be a Russian aggression. And there were also critical voices within Ukraine. Volodymyr Tolubko, a former commander of one of the largest nuclear bases in Ukraine, warned in the parliament at the time that Kiev would never be allowed to give up its nuclear lead. In April 1992, he shared with the assembly that it was romantic and early that Ukraine would declare itself a non-nuclear state. He insisted that it should at least keep some of its long-distance heads. But the proponents of a disarmament were in the majority, and so it finally came to a compromise. Ukraine would hand over all its nuclear weapons to Russia if it guaranteed it in return for the security of Ukraine. And so the Budapest Memorandum was created, the most important treaty in the history of the newly founded Ukraine. This memorandum was signed by Ukraine, Russia, the USA, and the United Kingdom. But let's take a closer look at it in detail. The Ukraine agreed to hand over all the nuclear weapons in its territory to Russia. And in addition to the transfer, it also agreed to hand over the air deterrence devices and infrastructure to Ukraine to remove or destroy in order to permanently end the use of nuclear weapons on its territory. In return, Russia vowed to guarantee comprehensive security. So it is written in the treaty that the signatories must respect the full sovereignty and territorial borders of Ukraine. No violence or threat of violence against territorial integrity and political independence of Ukraine may be used, and no nuclear weapons against Ukraine may be used or threaten to use them. And so, in the following months, all nuclear weapons were given to Russia and the remaining infrastructure made harmless. But as we know, Russia did not stick to this contract in reality. In 2014, it annexed the Crimea and started a comprehensive war against Ukraine in February 2022. Many Ukrainians therefore see the signing of the Budapest Memorandum as the biggest mistake in history today. "We have donated the ability for free," said Andriy Zahorodnik, a former defense minister of Ukraine. Looking at the security insurance that Ukraine received in exchange for its nuclear weapons, he added, "Every time someone offers us to sign a strip of paper, the answer is thank you. We had one like that a while ago." And that is why a contractual peace seems so far away in the current war. Because for what reason would the Ukraine have to believe that new Russian security guarantees, which would inevitably have to be made in a permanent peace treaty, have to be given? The trust between the two states is probably permanently destroyed. And so the Ukrainian expert Winfried Schneider-Dettes balanced the Budapest Memorandum with the following words: "The agreement is not worth the paper on which it was written." So that's it for the video. Did you know the history of Ukrainian nuclear weapons? Feel free to write it in the comments. Thank you all for watching to the end. I hope you enjoyed our content. If you liked this video, we would be happy if you could like it and share the video on your social networks and subscribe to the channel. We have always appreciated your support. Now let's get ready for the next video here on our Wikivedia Plus channel. We'll be back soon. A big hug, and until then, bye!